Hello and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this program today we'll be discussing the Israel Defense Force and some of the challenges that the Israeli army face, particularly lone soldiers who find themselves away from their family but serving and defending the State of Israel. Warm welcome to the program, and I have a very special guest all the way from Israel, and her name is Shifra Shahar, and she is the CEO of A Warm Home for Every Soldier. Shifra, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on the Middle East Report after 2 years, so welcome back.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're an absolutely remarkable woman. You're an inspiration. And I think the last time we did a program, I described you as the mother to the I.D.F, which you are. So can you share with us and remind our viewers that may have not seen the program we recorded together 2 years ago about the incredible work that you have done, pioneering work in helping to improve the welfare of Israeli soldiers, particularly lone soldiers, those foreign soldiers that come from abroad to serve in the I.D.F, who don't have any family in Israel and sometimes find themselves alone.
Yes, well, my activity began a little before we established the organization, a little over 8 years ago, when my older son was a young officer in the engineer corps, and apparently some of his soldiers were serving as lone soldiers, and he came to me with the problems that they were facing that at the time had no answer. And apparently that year was very remarkable, because during the time and until we were established exactly in January 7 years ago, we made a big change inside the army as far as laws and regulations for the benefit of lone soldiers. At the time, people were not aware of the fact that it was so hard and so difficult to serve as a lone soldier. And we find ourselves today in a much better time as far as the lone soldiers are concerned. One of the things I would like to mention for the people who may be hearing me for the first time, we have more than 3,000 soldiers who come from abroad, from all over the world, to serve Israel. They're away from their families, away from their culture. They have to learn a new language, and they do it, because they feel they feel as part of the nation, and that they have to defend Israel, and they're doing a remarkable thing with all the hardships. But another more than 3,000 lone soldiers are Israeli, and Israeli-born. Some of them are orphans, have no parents at all, about 600-700 of them. And the rest either come from ultra-Orthodox families that disconnect all contact with them as they join the army. And some of them come from broken homes, people whose father maybe sits in jail, mother is homeless, all kind of human tragedies, I would say. And they have to serve in the army because it's mandatory, not because they choose to. And they face tremendous hardships. And we are there to support them, to help them. And as far as all lone soldiers are concerned, also those who come from abroad and the Israelis, sometimes the bigger crisis is when the army finishes, and then they have to find themselves a home, they have to find themselves something to live from, and maybe to get on an education path. And one of the things that our organization is doing tremendously is paying their studies, scholarships, helping them finding homes, families to support them. And yeah, this is a constant, endless work to find more donations to do that, to have regulations to do that, changing laws in Israel for the benefit of these soldiers. Just recently, a month ago, I promoted a law that finally got through all lone soldiers will get 1,000 shekels a month for 12 months after their discharge from the army, which is not everything that we asked for, but definitely a good start to help them along with their life right after. I feel we owe these people so much. Absolutely. These people are defending us, risking their lives for us, really handling tremendous difficulties during their army service. So I think we owe them as much as we can to the rest of their lives.
Absolutely, and there's something very special about soldiers and those serve in Israel's defense force, and in particular the esteem that Israeli society holds their soldiers, because the only way you get fully really accepted in Israel is if you serve your time and you serve the nation. Has this change of laws and the government of Netanyahu that's been more supportive to improve the welfare of soldiers come about because they see that this is a political necessity, or is this coming from, say, grassroots supporters of Israeli societies who say, look, we need to improve the welfare of our soldiers?
Well, I must say that the government of Netanyahu, and especially now Defense Minister Lieberman, are more supportive of the I.D.F. The welfare of the I.D.F. soldiers, and very much concerned. One of the proof is that we started. It was a long year, many years struggle to raise the soldiers' wages, and we finally did that with the help of Netanyahu, who had to actually interfere and actually put his hands in so that this law will, and that the salaries will raise. And we see it also every day with our everyday work in the Knesset, in the parliament. So this government is very comprehensive about the soldiers' needs, their difficulties, and actually in our help of promoting everything that has to do with the soldiers' welfare.
Shifra, what was it that led you to really look after the welfare of these soldiers? And in particular, what are some of the worst cases that you've seen regarding some of the plight of lone soldiers or soldiers that come from very poor families in Israel?
Well, we see so much, so it's hard to say which are the worst or the most difficult stories, because every single day there are difficult stories. I think one of the hardest things for me to accept, and I'm doing everything that I can day and night to help that, is when a soldier says, I can't go home when everybody goes on vacation because my mother, my one-parent mother, can't feed me, doesn't have the money to feed me during leave of holiday or something like that. That is really something that strikes me in a way that, and actually our biggest donations during every year, and are actually growing because the Prime Minister's wife also is helping me receiving more and more donations for that matter, is food vouchers for those combat soldiers whose parents are so poor. This is something that is, for me, unacceptable, that if someone is serving in the army and fighting the wars and doing, really risking their lives, when they go home, they have to have some basic needs that should be obvious. I mean, I think even sometimes these families or mothers or fathers are sitting alone in a holiday because their son is on duty. So I believe that they have to have everything on their table in that holiday once they have a son on duty. And I'm doing everything that I can to do that.
Excellent. And can you tell us a little bit more about Sarah Netanyahu, the Prime Minister's wife, because she's been a tremendous advocate for you and your organisation, and has also really helped to improve the welfare of IDF soldiers. Can you tell us about your relationship with the Prime Minister's wife?
Yes, I really thank you for this question, because, you know, we hear a lot about how this specific Prime Minister's wife has been attacked by the media over and over again in an unspeakable way that I've never seen anyone else being attacked. And I've known a few Prime Minister's wives, previous ones, that haven't even done a third of or anything that, of the kind that she's doing. I must say about knowing very well the Prime Minister's wife that she is very, very sensitive and caring for not only soldiers, for the poor, for people who's been surviving the Holocaust, for ill children. She's herself a children's psychologist. And every time I approach her for any help, she's always there immediately to help. And as far as the soldiers are concerned, like me, she's motivated being a mother of 2 soldiers. Now one of her older son is not in the army any longer, but the younger one is. And she's so concerned with, exactly like me, with the fact that some soldiers go home and have no food on their tables, and she's doing everything in her power to help me raise funds for that matter and for other matters. And she's really very sensitive, very caring, very, and when I need her husband's help doing, you know, as far as regulations are concerned, she's always there to cut me, to cut the lines for me to speak with him. It's really, I think she's doing a tremendous job, and nobody is really, or very few, I would say very few reporters that are so much against her husband's leadership are showing it.
That's good to know that report about Sarah Netanyahu.
Yeah.
So let's have a look now at the plight of Israeli lone soldiers who find themselves from all over the world, who come to Israel to serve in the IDF and to help protect the Jewish state.
Each year, about 700 Olim soldiers who are in Israel alone without their families volunteer to serve in the army.
We're in charge of area of the border in Gaza, and if any emergencies happen, we go in and we take care of it. I'm serving in Golani in Grid 51.
החלטתי לעלות לישראל ולהתגייס לצבא, ברוב בזכות ציונות. אני משרת בחטיבת הנחל, שזה אחד מהחטיבות של חיל הרגלים.
I felt that as a Jew, it was my obligation to come here and help. If this is going on right now, that all of these people are coming back to Israel, I can't sit on the sidelines. I have to come and help out and do my part.
אפילו בשעות הכי קשות בשירות שלנו, אני לא הרגשתי שאני לבד. אני תמיד ידעתי שמישהו דואג, שאכפת למישהו.
After 3 or 4 years of service to the country, stemming from a deep sense of commitment, these idealistic youngsters from around the world are faced with the challenge of finding a place to live, obtaining an academic education, and finding a way to support themselves. While most young Israelis deal with this transition with the help of their families, these young men and women need us to provide them with a helping hand. They need us to be their family in Israel.
I can tell you, as a lone soldier, I've benefited countless ways from all the support I've gotten from other communities through organizations such as I.D.F. There's so many organizations that help Chayalim Bodedim and anything that we need, and we need that because we have no one else here.
I.D.F. UIA, among other partners, supports the Jewish Agency for Israel in providing these lone soldiers with various forms of assistance.
בשלב של סוף השירות אתה אומר לעצמך, אוקיי, עכשיו אני מסיים את הצבא, מה אני הולכת לעשות? איך ממשיכים? לאן הולכים?
The WINGS program was started in 2005 to provide close support and assistance for lone soldiers from the last months of their service to their first years as civilians, transforming them from lone soldiers to successful citizens with the tools to integrate into Israeli society and fully realize their potential.
Nos ayudan con psicólogos para encaminarnos a si queremos estudiar, si queremos trabajar, para dónde queremos seguir nuestra vida, y nos ayudan también en guiarnos económicamente.
Grants are provided to help them buy necessary essentials or to cover other expenses related to their life as civilians. As part of the Big Brother program, a lone soldier is adopted by a big brother who guides him in his initial steps in civilian life.
פשוט דיברתי איתה אפילו על דברים אישיים, על משהו שרציתי לשמוע ממישהו אחר.
Since its inception, the Lone Soldiers program has assisted over 5,000 youngsters and helped smooth their absorption into Israeli society.
שירות צבאי שאני עושה עוזר לי מאוד להשתלב בחברת ישראלית. אני מקווה שהחברים שקיבלתי פה יהיו החברים שלי לכל החיים.
אני מרגישה, במקום שלי אני מרגישה שקיבלתי המון מהתוכניות, מהסוכנות היהודית, מהמדינה, ויש לי עכשיו מה לתת, ואני מרגישה שאני רוצה לתת.
אני מאמין שאני לא הייתי יכול לעשות את זה, לשרת בצבא, בלי כל העזרה שאני מקבל מאנשים אחרים.
אני מרגישה ישראלית, גם פה בישראל וגם שם בחו"ל, ואני מרגישה שאני מייצגת את המדינה הזאת.
Well, we really need to pray for the IDF and pray for Israel's defense forces doing an incredible job protecting the nation of Israel against untold terror threats. And, they're all doing such an incredible job that they need our prayers and they need our support. Shifra, we just saw on that video presentation the plight of many lone Israeli soldiers. And there's something very special about the soldiers, both men and women, that come from abroad to actually serve in the IDF. What does it mean for you to know that there are so many Jewish people and also Christians as well that want to actually serve in the IDF and help to protect Israel against terrorism?
It's definitely encouraging, it's definitely thrilling. I think it's really not obvious. I don't think there's such a phenomenon in any other place in the world, that people are coming from all over the world to one small country that is totally isolated in the Middle East, surrounded by so many enemies, many times risking good and comfortable life, and to protect the nation of Israel. This is really something that doesn't exist anywhere else at any other time in history. And if we think of the last 100 years of history of the Jewish people, this is so not obvious. Just to think what happened 70 years ago when the Jewish people were almost destroyed, and thank God we didn't. We survived, the Jewish people survived it. And to see people who are coming from all over the world seeking actually this moment, understanding that this is a very historical time, that the Jewish people can defend themselves, and joining that from all over the world, Jews and non-Jews, I think it's thrilling, and my commitment is to do everything that I can to make their life better.
Absolutely. And you were saying before we showed that video presentation that the IDF relies on your donations, particularly at times like Pesach, Passover, when they actually need to give out more food to Israeli soldiers as well. So
yes, definitely. The IDF is doing a lot. I must say more and more also with our help, but they're doing a lot to help the lone soldiers. But still, before the holidays, a lot of people who are not lone soldiers, they come from very poor families, coming from families that are so poor that have no food on their tables. And we say that we must help these families celebrate the holidays and the Passover in dignity, and we give very nice food vouchers for those families, and the army is actually counting on our donation, because our donations are so big now that more than 2,500 families received the last holidays, and we always make it bigger, both the donation itself and the amount of families that receive it. And we're already getting ready for Passover donations, absolutely, for all those people, to make sure that each and every family, and we got so many phone calls and letters thanking us, because those families who getting these vouchers have no money and no food to put on the table. And I think if their son or daughter, mostly sons, but some daughters, are defending our country, we have to make sure that they have food on the table.
Absolutely. Also, do you deal with some of the psychological impacts of serving in the army, and particularly those that have actually seen death and they've been involved in conflict against terrorist organisations? I mean, the most recent case was Castle Ed back in 2014, when many soldiers had to go into Gaza and confront Hamas and see terrible scenes, such as Hamas using children with bombs on them to run at the Israeli soldiers. How do you deal with those deep psychological impacts of war that has scarred many soldiers, particularly the frontline soldiers?
Yes, again, thank you for this question. We definitely have, especially after Operation Tzuk Eitan, a lot of soldiers are considered, at least in a certain extent, of post-traumatic behavior. And we have a very good cooperation with an association in Jerusalem that is taking care of post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And actually, for those who can't pay for it, we are paying for it. And these people actually have both individual and group workshops, and we see, and they also have some programs such as running together, doing sports together, and also on one-on-one treatment. And we see tremendous results, and we actually dealing with it every single day, working with fantastic psychologists. Some of them are working, some of them are volunteering, and as I said before, for those who can't pay, we find the funds we collect the funds to pay for it. And yes, absolutely. And we see actually these people, after a short while, getting back on track, getting back going back to normal activity. But definitely, these young men and women were facing tremendous stress, and they were witnessing some things that no other 18 and 19 and 20-year-old young adults are facing anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely. And also we know that particularly the I.D.F are attacked by the enemies of Israel, and yet Israel is the most humane army in the world when it comes to welfare, but also in the way it comes to carrying out operations. The famous Colonel Richard Kemp, who's a British commander, speaks so highly of the I.D.F. What would you say to the critics of Israel when it comes to the morality of Israeli soldiers when they're in combat situations?
Yes, you probably also refer to one of the, maybe I would say, biggest discussion in Israel in the last few months concerning the trial of the soldier Elor Azaria. We definitely had to take a side in this, and we definitely will always be on the side of the soldiers. And also talking about the officers of the Israeli army, we must remember two things. First of all, that Israel is under constant terror attack. And those days where Azaria might have made a mistake, that is actually the discussion, whether he made a mistake shooting the terrorist who came to kill us, when he was nearly dead, or maybe he wasn't making a mistake because he was in danger. That is the whole discussion. And a lot of our enemies, both inside Israel and around the world, are taking advantage of this discussion as if we're talking about a proper human being who was lying there on the road. People must remember that this was a terrorist of the worst kind who came with a sharp knife to slaughter I.D.F. soldiers. And he was shot and maybe was not totally dead. This is also a question, maybe he was dead or not totally dead, but I think there should be no way that terrorists like this come out alive out of this kind of an attack. And attacking the Israeli soldiers and also putting high commanders and high officers of Israeli army, such as chief of staff, in a constant position where they always have to either apologize or defend our acts when we are the ones who are being attacked. We are the ones who are being slaughtered. Just, I want to take all our viewers back to those days of the winter of last year. Every single day, someone was slaughtered in the streets of Jerusalem, of Hebron, of Israel. And our soldiers were there day and night. I remember, because we work so closely with all I.D.F. combat units, that those soldiers, all vacations were canceled. They were not sleeping sometimes for 3 or 4 days in a row, including also El Azaria. So when you're under constant pressure and danger, you might make mistakes also. But using that in a cynical way to attack I.D.F. soldiers as if they were not moral, this is totally misleading, misunderstanding, and I think very cruel way of again attacking Israel and attacking the I.D.F. soldiers. We must remember the conditions under which these things were taking place, and we, as always, have to think of the soldiers' situation. We say that, first of all, I'm not sure there was a mistake, but even if there was a mistake in El Azaria's actions, it was just a mistake of a soldier who was many months under terror attacks and with no sleep, with no, actually also in real danger of their own lives.
Absolutely. And isn't one of the major problems Israel face is that Israel abides by the 4th Geneva Convention on military warfare, but Israel's enemies don't. The likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Authority, that they conduct what is known as kind of asymmetrical warfare, where they do not abide by the moral code set out by the 4th Geneva Convention, and that they will use any means to attack civilian or soldiers and just randomly stab them. Or what we saw back in the end of or beginning of January of this year was that terrible terror truck attack that mowed down 4 Israeli soldiers, 3 of them being girls, and injuring another 15.
Yes, exactly. We are dealing with enemies of the worst kind, and I always say, if we have compassion for those evil, we'll end up being evil for the compassionate. So we have to remember who we're dealing with and who we are facing, and never forget that. And everything else is hypocrisy, and I don't even want to say. I want to end this conversation in optimistic and good words. I hope that everyone will understand that the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world. I don't know how much the media is showing how our army is providing and helping people from Syria. We must remember that Syria were one of our biggest enemies, maybe still are the biggest enemies, but yet there is an army hospital in the north that takes care of wounded from Syria. People who are innocent, children, women who have done nothing wrong in their lives and are coming to Israel for medical care. Every single day, even these moments that we're speaking, our army doctors are operating them, taking care of them, feeding them. I don't think there's any other nation or any other army in the world that does that to their enemies.
That's very true. And also, I heard about a remarkable story last year, Shifra, where a Syrian girl was treated in an Israeli hospital, had a very rare bone disease, and the only way that she would be cured is if Israel actually brought one of her relatives to Israel to have the same kind of bone marrow transplanted to her in order to save her life. So the IDF then sent out special forces to bring her relative over to Israel to treat her. Now, I don't know any other nation that would risk the life of their elite soldiers to protect and help a little girl. Doesn't that show something about the compassion and love and heart that the Israelis have, including that of the IDF?
Yes, absolutely. It's part of the nation morality, and the IDF is definitely a big part of that, because our army is our nation, and definitely very moral, and I don't think there's any example for that in the world, of an army that would do that to people who, even today, no Israeli can step out to the and go over the border of Syria. Yet, when they come to us, they get treatment, they get help, they get a lot of really love and compassion, and that shows it all. I don't think there's any other army in the world that does that.
Yeah. So let's remind ourselves of the horrendous truck terror attack that we witnessed in the beginning of January 2017 that murdered 4 Israeli soldiers.
A truck used once again as a weapon. And as in the attacks last year in Nice and in Berlin, witnesses say the driver clearly intended to kill. One survivor describes the moment he was hit, before he got up and shot at the assailant. The truck sent me flying. I was lucky, just have a couple of bruises. The corner of the truck hit my left side and sent me into the air. I flipped a couple of times on the grass. I'm amazed that I'm standing here right now. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the site and said authorities have already determined the attacker's identity. Netanyahu also said he's believed to be a supporter of Islamic State. Israeli police say they had no warning the suspect planned to strike. We're talking about an East Jerusalemite who perpetrated the attack. That's why he could drive an Israeli car with a local license plate, and that he could decide at any moment that he would attack. Sunday's incident marks the first assault in several months in which Israelis have died. But it comes as a series of lone wolf knife attacks targeting Israelis are fresh in the country's memory.
And our hearts go out to the family of those Israeli soldiers who were sadly mowed down and murdered in the prime of their life. Shifra, you were saying when we showed that news report there that you actually know one of the soldiers that was murdered by this ISIS terrorist, one of the girls and stuff as well. And how does a family then deal with the death or murder of a loved one when they're serving in the IDF? And they're wearing the Israeli uniform?
Well, I don't know how the family is dealing. It's really hard to think, but specifically this girl comes from a poor family, and she was so talented she was like a teacher inside the army, and it took time to convince the family so that she would go to officers training, and this caught her in the middle of officers training. Actually, towards the end, she was almost being an officer, which could be a big honor for the family. So this was a really horrible disaster. Also, I spoke to some of her commanders who were visiting the family and the parents several months ago, convincing them that she would go to officers training, and then, this happens. A great tragedy, really.
Absolutely.
So heartbreaking.
Yeah. This is why I know that you very much believe in God. You believe in the God of Israel and Hashem. It's so important, isn't it, from a spiritual point of view, that we pray daily for the I.D.F. and for those protecting Israel, protecting Israel's borders, including Israel's intelligence, because the threats and the challenges that Israel face, no other Western nation in the world have to face the same terrorist threats.
Absolutely, and as a great believer of God, I can tell you that even though we have a great army and we have great soldiers and great officers, we see the miracles every day. Without the help of God, I don't think any nation, small nation, would survive in such an area in the Middle East where we're surrounded by the worst enemies who have no more morality at all and who are so determined to destroy us. And it doesn't happen. We actually grow and we develop and we get stronger, and this is definitely with the help of God. And we pray every day that this will continue, and I believe, I'm really counting on the help of God.
Absolutely. So let's remind ourselves of some of the challenges that Israel face, and this is Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talking about an incident that actually shocked him to his core, and this is what Israel has to deal with almost on a daily basis.
I've just watched a video that shook me to the core of my being. In just a few seconds, it shows why our conflict persists. So here's a short snippet. A Palestinian father holds up his 4-year-old son. He pleads with Israeli border police to kill his own child. He shouts, "Shoot this little boy," his boy. He pushes his young son forward towards the soldiers and screams, "Kill him! Shoot him!" The boy pauses. He's scared. Any child would be. He turns back, looking at his father for guidance. With his shirt tightly tucked into his bright red shorts, the boy ambles forwards towards the soldiers. One of them extends his hand in friendship. The boy gives him a high five. It's hard to make a 4-year-old hate. Imagine your own child at that age. Think of his smile. Imagine her laugh. Picture the unrestrained joy and innocence that only a child possesses. Encouraging someone to murder a child, let alone your own child, is probably the most inhumane thing a person can do. What did this child do to deserve this? The answer is nothing. He's innocent. He should be in a playground. He should be in the sun, laughing with other children. Sadly, this father's crime is not an isolated example. In Gaza, Hamas runs summer camps that teach children to value death over life, suicide kindergarten camps. The Palestinian Ministry of Education in Ramallah recently organized an event for students to honor terrorists who murdered 3 civilians. 2 weeks ago, the Palestinian Authority's official newspaper praised teenage terrorists and wrote that death as a martyr is the path to excellence and greatness. That's a direct quote. Palestinian and Israeli children deserve better. They deserve to live. They deserve to live in peace. Children are not cannon fodder. They're the most precious things in the world. They're the most precious things we have. I'm sure Palestinian parents, many of them, are as outraged as I am at this video. And today I appeal to every father and mother around the world. I ask you to join me in calling for an end to this abuse of children. The Palestinian leadership must stop encouraging children to kill. They must stop encouraging Palestinian parents to call for the death of their own children. It's horrendous. Peace begins with respect. If parents don't respect their own children's lives, how will they respect the lives of their neighbors? We must love all children. They should never be pushed to violence or hate. Join me in educating all children for peace.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there showed incredible courage to talk about the threats that Israel has to deal with and what army should have to deal with what Israel has to deal with. A Palestinian father sending his toddler to run at Israeli soldiers to be shot is absolutely horrific, and it's something that shows of the evil nature of the Palestinian Authority. Shifra, we saw in that very shocking video the fact that a Palestinian father would actually use his son, to sacrifice his son, to run up against Israeli soldiers in the hope that these soldiers would actually shoot his son. Isn't this an indication of the mindset of the Palestinian Authority and the indoctrination of hatred and incitement of violence ever since the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, that the Palestinian Authority is actually preparing Palestinians to commit genocide against Israel and against the Jewish people, and this is what Israel faces?
Well, I think we are witnessing some dramatic changes in the world. Just last week, I overheard an interview in Israeli radio with a Syrian man who was treated in an Israeli hospital, in a Syrian refugee. And he mentioned an incredible story that I once heard from our soldiers back in 73 war. A tank troop overtook a small town in Syria and was actually staying there for a couple of months. And this guy mentioned that the Israeli army was there for over 2 months and nobody touched the women, nobody touched the children. They were just staying there. Nobody, and this Syrian man said on Israeli radio that any other army in the world would come, would kill, would rape, would hit, would steal. None of that was done by Israeli IDF soldiers. So 40 years later, he's mentioning this memory. And I think it's incredible. I think it says it all. So we are witnessing dramatic historical events that are changing people's perspective, I think.
Absolutely, and we need to do that. We're down to the last 5 minutes of the program, Shifra, and this is a way to ask, what can our viewers do that are passionate supporters of Israel and the Jewish people to support the IDF and the incredible work that you're doing?
Okay, so I think every one of us is witnessing at any time a lot of anti-Israel propaganda. I think everyone in our little place in the world have to change that and do everything we can, say everything we can to change that and to say how untrue it is. And as far as our work is concerned, on behalf of the welfare of IDF soldiers, I think any donation would be blessed, any donation would be welcome, small and big, whatever, and people can donate through PayPal, through credit cards, in our website, on our Facebook page, Warm Home for Every Soldier. I think you'll have the details, and we are most grateful for every donation. Also now we are facing in a few weeks the big campaign for the Passover holiday, helping all the soldiers who come from poor families, and every help for that matter will be
excellent.
Appreciated.
And also, you also asked after volunteers that can help as well, or people that can give up their time.
I'll tell you, we are using a lot of volunteers in Israel, but I don't know about volunteers from the world, because a lot of our volunteers are either lawyers, psychologists, people who are really giving professional help with pro bono. As far as being far in the world and helping, the IDF soldiers, it's a bit hard, but if we can't help, we can buy help. So any donation for that matter would be welcome.
Excellent. Shifra, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report, and I want to thank you for the incredible work that you do in helping the IDF and improving the welfare of IDF soldiers, and you're not known for the mother of the IDF for nothing. So thank you for joining us on today's program.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Pleasure. And I just want to thank you all for watching today's program. We've seen the challenges that IDF soldiers face in defending the nation of Israel. They need our prayers, and they also need our support, because they are giving their lives to defend the one and only Jewish state against the threat of terrorism that we see all around Israel's neighborhood. So this song is dedicated to the courage and the bravery of the soldiers who serve in the IDF.
קדושת היום, כי הוא נורא ואיום, ובוא תנסה מלכותך, ויכון בחסד כיסאך, ותשב עליו באמת, ותשב אמת כי אתה הוא דיין ומוכיח ויודע ואין וסופר וחותם וסופר ומונה ותזכור כל הנשכחות ותפתח את ספר הזיכרונות ומאליו יקרא וחותם יד כל אדם בו ובשופר גדול ייתקע וכל דממה דקה יישמע ומלאכים יחפזו וכאילו רעדה יוחזו ומלאכים יחפזו וכאילו רעדה יוחזו ושופר גדול ייתקע וכל דממה דקה יישמע ומלאכים יחפזו וכאילו רעדה יוחזו ומלאכים יחפזו וכאילו רעדה יוחזו ויאמרו הנה יום הדין לפקוד על צבא מרום בדין כי לא יזכו בעיניך בדין וכל באי עולם יעברו לפניך כבני מרום כבקרת רועה בו מעביר צונות תחת שבטו וכל באי עולם יעברו לפניך כבני מרום כבקרת רועה בו מעביר צונות תחת שבטו תעביר ותספור ותמנה ותפקוד נפש כולך ותחתוך קצבה לכל בריאה ותכתוב בגזר דינם משול כפרס הנשבע כחציר יבש וחצית נובש אך לא שבת וכאבק פורח וכך לא